In the year 1903, Charles Whitmore stood at the tall window of his family's grand Boston home, watching the snow fall quietly on the cobblestone streets. His life had always looked perfect from the outside. He wore the finest suits, attended the most exclusive events, and was treated as if he were destined for great things. But behind those carefully polished appearances, Charles felt trapped, like a bird in a golden cage. His father owned a large shipping company that traded goods across the Atlantic. Everyone in Boston's high society knew the Whitmore name. It carried weight, power, and expectations. Since childhood, Charles was told exactly who to be. He learned how to speak properly, how to shake hands, how to smile even when he didn't want to, and how to behave like a gentleman from sunrise to sunset. But as he grew older, the more he understood that every step of his life was already planned for him. His father wanted him to take over the family business. His mother wanted him to marry Eleanor Bell, a young woman from another rich family. Every dinner party he attended was filled with polite laughter, but it all felt like a play, and he was just acting his part. Inside, Charles was tired. He longed for something real, something that didn't involve ballrooms, rehearsed conversations, or polite fake smiles. He wanted a life where his choices actually mattered. One cold evening, while walking past a small newsstand, something unexpected caught his eye. It was a folded newspaper from the Western Territories. Its edges were worn and the ink slightly faded. He bought it on impulse and carried it back to his room. As he flipped through its pages by lamplight, he saw ads from farmers, ranchers, and townspeople looking for help, supplies, and sometimes companionship. One small advertisement stood out. It wasn't printed in bold or decorated with flourishes. It simply read, "Widow rancher seeks husband, Wyoming Territory. Must be willing to work and live a simple life. No fancy talk. No promises of easy living. Honest heart required." M. Hartwell. Red Willow. Ranch Charles read the words over and over again. They were plain and honest. They didn't sound like the elegant, polished words of Boston society. They felt real. He imagined Wyoming, wide open land, clear skies, fresh air, and a life where no one cared about family names or dinner party manners. He imagined what it would be like to be free from everything that weighed him down. For the first time in years, his heart beat faster, not out of fear or pressure, but out of excitement. For a few days, he tried to push the thought away. It seemed ridiculous. How could the son of the Whitmore family simply leave everything and marry a woman he had never met? But the more he tried to forget, the stronger the idea grew in his mind. It was like a small spark that refused to die. Late one night, unable to sleep, Charles sat at his desk and wrote a letter. "Dear Mrs. Hartwell, my name is Charles Whitmore. I am a man who wishes for a different kind of life. I have no experience on a ranch, but I am willing to work hard and learn. If you are still seeking someone, I would be honored to write again. Charles." He didn't mention his family's name or wealth. He didn't want to be chosen because of money. He wanted for once to be accepted for who he was, not who he was supposed to be. He mailed the letter without telling anyone. Days passed, then weeks. He convinced himself it was just a foolish moment, a daydream. But one gray afternoon, while walking down the front steps of the house, a letter arrived with unfamiliar handwriting. His heart jumped when he saw the return address, Red Willow Ranch, Wyoming. He went to his room and opened the envelope carefully. The letter inside was short and direct. "Mr. Whitmore, I'm not looking for fancy words. I'm looking for someone who can work, keep their word, and not run when life gets hard. If that's you, there's a place here. Train ticket enclosed. Maggie Hartwell." Inside the envelope was a single train ticket, Boston to Wyoming, one way. Charles stared at it for a long time. The choice felt impossible but strangely clear. Stay in Boston and live the life everyone expected of him, or leave everything behind and step into the unknown. That night at dinner, his father spoke about the future of the shipping company. His mother spoke of Eleanor Bell's upcoming birthday party. Charles sat quietly, their voices sounding distant, as if he were already somewhere else. He felt the folded ticket in his pocket like a secret burning against his skin. He didn't sleep that night. He walked through the silent halls of the house, the portraits of ancestors staring down at him from the walls. It felt as if they were all silently demanding he stay and obey. But he was tired of obeying. Before the sun rose, he packed a single trunk, a few clothes, some books, and his savings. No one saw him leave. The carriage that took him to the station rolled quietly through the sleeping streets. At the train platform, Charles looked up at the iron engine. Steam rose into the early morning air. His hands shook, not from fear but from the thrill of what he was about to do. For the first time, his life belonged to him. The train ride was long and unfamiliar. The further west the train went, the more the landscape changed. Tall buildings gave way to open fields. The air smelled different, cleaner, wilder. At each stop, people with dusty boots and sunburned faces climbed aboard, laughing loudly, carrying bags of grain or worn suitcases. No one looked at him like they knew who he was. It was strangely comforting. During the journey, Charles imagined the woman who had written to him, Maggie Hartwell, a widow rancher. He wondered if she was kind, strict, quiet, or loud. He had no picture of her, just her words, plain, strong, and clear. He imagined what life on a ranch might be like, early mornings, working with animals, real labor. It was so different from polished shoes and candlelit parties. He didn't know if he was strong enough, but he knew one thing: he was willing to try. As the train crossed rivers and climbed through plains, Charles felt layers of his old life slowly peel away. He was no longer Charles Whitmore, heir to a fortune. He was just a man traveling west with a ticket, a letter, and a new beginning. After days of travel, the train finally slowed near a small wooden station. A simple sign read, Red Willow Junction. The platform was dusty and quiet. There were only a few people waiting: farmers, a boy with a crate of chickens, and a woman in a long brown coat and a wide hat. Her arms were crossed, and her face was half hidden by the brim of her hat. But her posture was straight, strong, and unshaken by the cold wind. Charles stepped down, clutching his trunk. She looked at him, not with the soft smile of someone who'd waited for a fairy tale prince, but with the sharp, measuring eyes of someone who'd worked hard all her life. In that brief glance, Charles understood something important. This would not be an easy life. The woman walked toward him with steady steps. "You're Whitmore?" she asked, her voice calm but firm. "Yes," Charles said, a little unsure. "I'm Maggie Hartwell." She extended her hand, not for a gentle greeting but like someone shaking hands before a deal. Charles took it. Her grip was strong and her palm was rough, the kind that told stories of hard work. She looked at his clean shoes, his neatly combed hair, his carefully folded coat. Then she gave a small, quick nod. "Well," she said, "let's see if you can handle it." She didn't offer sweet words or warm welcomes. Instead, she turned and walked toward the wagon waiting near the road. Charles followed, carrying his trunk, feeling both nervous and strangely alive. As the wagon rolled toward the ranch, the wind brushed against his face. The land stretched out endlessly on both sides: golden fields, wooden fences, distant hills. It was nothing like Boston. There was no orchestra, no chatter, no glass chandeliers, only sky and earth, and a future that hadn't been decided for him. Charles didn't know what lay ahead. He didn't know how hard the days would be or how many times he might feel like turning back. But he also knew something else. He had made this choice. For the first time in his life, it was his choice, and no matter what happened, that made all the difference. When Charles stepped down from that wagon for the first time, he felt as if he had arrived on a different planet. The ranch stretched far and wide, almost endless. The wooden fence ran along the dirt road, and in the distance, horses moved slowly across golden fields. A windmill creaked softly, turning with the breeze. The house was not large or fancy. It was simple, strong, and made of weathered wood. Maggie Hartwell got off the wagon with the same quiet strength she had shown at the station. She didn't talk much on the way there, and Charles didn't know what to say either. Everything around him was new. He had grown up surrounded by tall buildings and busy streets, but here, the land was open and wild. The air smelled of hay and fresh earth. She turned to him and said in her calm, steady voice, "This isn't Boston. Things here are different. You work hard or you don't last." Charles nodded. "I understand." Maggie gave him a quick glance as if she wasn't sure he truly did. She led him inside the house. The living room had a wood stove, 2 wooden chairs, and a table with a lantern on it. There were no shiny decorations, no expensive paintings, no velvet curtains. But it was warm, clean, and smelled faintly of fresh bread. "This used to be my husband's ranch," Maggie said. Her voice didn't tremble. It was steady, like someone who had learned how to live with pain without letting it control her. "When he passed, I kept it going. It's hard work. I need someone who won't run when it gets tough." Charles felt a knot in his chest. He had come from a world where most problems were solved with money or polite conversations. But here things were raw and honest. He said softly, "I won't run." The next morning began before sunrise. Charles was not used to waking up that early. In Boston, his mornings began with servants bringing breakfast to his room. Here Maggie knocked on his door at 5 in the morning and said, "If you want to be useful, get up." He dressed quickly, feeling the cold air bite through his shirt. Outside, the sky was still dark, painted with a few pale stars. Maggie handed him a pair of worn gloves and pointed to the barn. "Animals first, always." Charles followed her, trying not to trip over the uneven ground. Inside the barn, the horses and cows waited. The smell was strong and unfamiliar, and the work was harder than anything he had ever done. Maggie moved quickly, feeding the animals, cleaning stalls, and checking fences as if it were second nature. Charles tried to follow, but he was slow, clumsy, and kept getting in the way. At one point, a small bucket slipped from his hand and water spilled across the floor. He expected Maggie to get angry, but she just gave him a long look and said, "Pick it up. Try again." There was no softness in her tone, but also no cruelty, just expectation. Charles bent down, cleaned the mess, and tried again. Days turned into weeks. The work was exhausting. Charles had blisters on his hands, sore muscles, and more than once he thought about giving up. But something in him had changed. Each time he wanted to quit, he remembered Boston. The strict dinner tables, the polished shoes, the weight of expectations. He didn't want to go back to that. Not anymore. Maggie worked harder than anyone he had ever met. She never complained, never waited for someone to rescue her. She carried heavy buckets, fixed fences, and rode her horse with quiet confidence. She didn't tell him how to do everything, but she expected him to learn. Slowly, Charles began to understand the rhythm of ranch life. He learned how to carry hay without dropping it, how to clean stalls quickly, and how to keep the animals calm. He learned how to mend fences, drive a wagon, and find his way in the dark with only the stars above him. Maggie didn't praise him often, but every once in a while she gave a short nod when he did something right. That nod meant more to him than all the polite applause he had ever received at those elegant Boston parties. One afternoon, after weeks of hard work, Maggie handed him the reins of the wagon. "Drive," she said. He looked at her, surprised. "Me? Yes, you." "I'm not going to do everything for you." Charles climbed onto the wagon seat. The horses snorted and stomped. His hands trembled slightly, but Maggie sat beside him, arms folded, watching him closely. He guided the horses down the dirt road, slowly at first, then more confidently. When they reached the edge of the ranch, the open land spread out before them like an ocean of gold and green. Maggie said nothing, but Charles noticed the smallest smile at the corner of her mouth. It was the first time he had seen her smile. Something warm settled inside him. But life on the ranch wasn't just hard work. It was also quiet nights under endless stars. It was the sound of wind in the grass, the way the sun painted the sky orange at dusk, and the smell of fresh bread baking in the kitchen. Charles had never noticed such things in Boston because everything had always been loud, busy, and crowded. Here, he learned to listen to the land, to the animals, and to the silence. Maggie remained strong and distant for a long time. She was not a woman who gave her trust easily. She had built her life alone after losing her husband, and she didn't believe in easy promises. But she watched Charles carefully, and what she saw over time began to shift something inside her. He didn't give up when things were hard. He didn't complain. He learned. And slowly, Without even realizing it, they began to work side by side like partners. There was one evening when the wind was blowing hard. The lantern on the porch flickered. Maggie was sitting on the steps with a cup of tea looking at the land. Charles came out and sat beside her. They didn't speak for a while. Then she said softly, "Why did you really come here?" Charles looked at the dark horizon and said, "Because I wanted a life that was mine. Back in Boston, everything was chosen for me. I wanted to choose something for myself. I didn't know if I'd be good at this, but I wanted to try." She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "You're not bad at it." For Maggie, those words were as close to a compliment as anyone could hope for. Charles smiled. Seasons changed. Spring brought new calves, long work days, and warm winds. Charles's hands grew stronger, his back sturdier. He no longer looked like the fragile man who stepped off the train months earlier. The land had changed him, shaped him, and made him someone different, someone real. Maggie also began to change in her own quiet way. She still worked hard, but sometimes she laughed softly at his awkward jokes. Sometimes she shared stories about her past, about the early days on the ranch with her husband, about the struggles and the small victories that made her who she was. She didn't do this with everyone. She did it because, without realizing it, she had started to trust him. One evening, after a long day of fixing fences and feeding animals, they sat on the porch again. The sky above was filled with stars, brighter than any city light. Charles leaned back, breathing in the cool night air. "I never thought I'd find peace like this," he said. Maggie looked at him. Her eyes were softer than before, though still guarded. "It's not easy. It never will be. But if you can stand beside me, not ahead of me or behind me, then maybe this place can be home for you too." Her words hung in the night air, gentle but strong. Charles nodded slowly. "I want that," he said. In that quiet moment, something unspoken passed between them. It wasn't a storybook romance with music and grand gestures. It was something deeper, trust earned through shared work, respect built through quiet understanding. As summer stretched over the land, Charles became a true part of the ranch. He wasn't the man from Boston anymore. He was simply Charles, someone who rose before dawn, worked until sunset, and built a life with his own hands. Maggie was still Maggie, strong, steady, and proud. But she no longer carried the entire weight of the ranch alone. And though she never said the words out loud, she was glad for the quiet company beside her. They didn't need to rush anything. They didn't need to promise forever. All they needed was to keep walking side by side as the days came and went. Charles had fled high society in search of freedom, and he had found it in the wide, open fields of Wyoming, not in wealth, but in honesty. Not in fancy words, but in quiet moments. He had once feared the unknown. Now he welcomed it. The man who had once been a stranger at the train station was now part of something real. And Maggie, who had once closed her heart to new beginnings, had opened it just enough to let someone in, not as a savior, but as an equal. And in that simple, strong way, their story continued, day by day, sunrise after sunrise, in the heart of the land they both chose.